Recognizing that every manager that will be here tonight is in the room, I will call to order the meeting for March 9th, 2017 to order. Are there any matters from the floor that are not on tonight's agenda? And I know there is a new staff person present, and now might be a good person to come on up and introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Jim Rudolph. I'm the district representative for this field season. I graduated a couple years ago from the U of M with a degree in environmental science, focused on hydrology. I've worked at Capital Region Watershed District and Washington Conservation District, and I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to get more experience.
Welcome to the side of the metro.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome. Are there any additions, corrections, or changes to tonight's agenda? Motion for approval will be in order.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, there is the year in review, I think was it distributed last week? I know it was, okay. I know I saw it in the mail as well, yeah. And on tonight's consent agenda, we have the February 23rd meeting minutes and resolution 17-012, an authorization to execute an agreement with Great River Greening that has been corrected. Motion for approval will be in order for those as well.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And Manager White is not here tonight. She's at a funeral. I'll let her give a report at some point in the future because I have none. Manager Miller?
We had a presentation of the format for the comprehensive review with focus on the subwatershed district, the subwatershed plans. That will be the non-technical portion of the submission. That will be the reading for the policymakers and public, and it's very well done and easy to read. And I don't know, it's attorney looking over it. So far, it's easier to read. We were warned that the attorneys are kind of looking at this stuff.
Is that one I get done with it?
Yeah. You didn't have to say it. Because there's so much specific requirements in the thing, but hopefully we can get by with some very creative lawyering to be a plan. That portion of the plan at least can be readable by the general public. So we're pretty excited about that.
All right, thank you. Upcoming meetings and event schedule. The next three sets of meetings are on our agenda, and there's nothing else that's been added. Item 9.1, Research and Monitoring 2017 Monitoring Plan. Ms. Dooley.
Chair Shackleton, Board of Managers. I'm here tonight to present the 2017 Monitoring Plan. And Minister Erdal is passing out a legend that will be needed to understand in the presentation, and I will go through that in a little bit. But first I wanted to say that on February 9th, you guys, the Board of Managers, excuse me, supported or approved approved the strategic direction for the district. And the research and monitoring department is here, myself, and then Eric Fields with some items later in the agenda to discuss, to demonstrate how we plan to operationalize the new strategic direction. With that, just want to review our research and monitoring department's purpose. Our purpose is to broadly characterize ecological health, diagnose drivers of change, but on a project implementation scale. So why is a lake going green with algae in November? Is this wetland pumping out phosphorus? We're going to be diagnosing why. And then communicate the results and make recommendations based on those results, and then collaborate on management strategies, specifically with the planning department. So through the strategic direction, we have prioritized our framework or our workload, and the first priority is diagnosing drivers of change. Secondarily would be characterizing ecological health, and then our third priority is assessing long-term change throughout the watershed. And with the highest priority, with all three of those, we strongly want to work on analyzing and making recommendations and being part of making sure that the management strategies have sound science to base their decisions on. Catch my breath. With that, with your support in this new direction, we realized the bulk of our work in the past has been in the anchor monitoring, assessing long-term trends. And to go with this new framework, we have to essentially streamline our anchor monitoring program. So before you is a summary of our anchor stations, and we categorize our anchor stations in 4 categories. Our upper watershed lakes, such as Gleason, Christmas, Long Lake, Pearsons, and then the bays on Lake Minnetonka, upper watershed creeks, so the creeks that drain into Lake Minnetonka, and then Minnehaha Creek. So prior to 2017, we had 11 upper watershed lake stations. We had 27 bays on Lake Minnetonka when I started in 2008. In 2013, we did a statistical analysis, and we determined we had some stations that were statistically similar to each other, so we were able to reduce those stations to 21. We did another statistical analysis in 2015 on our stream stations, and we were able to make changes there as well. So prior to 2017, we had 69 anchor stations. That is a lot of stations to be assessing change over time. And so the presentation before you will be showing how we made the decision to cut these stations, how to reassign these stations to different priorities or different objectives. So instead of, these are not all going to be anchor stations. Some will be E-grade stations, some will be diagnostic stations, etc. So determining how we'd assign these stations, we went through each station, we went through this list of criteria. So the data record. We have some stations that go back all the way to 1968, and some stations that have a record of 2013 to 2016. So we have either a 48-year record or a 3-year record. It's a wide range. So we assessed the data record. We did a statistical analysis comparing stations. So we were noticing that we monitored the lake, and we also monitored the lake outlet in many cases. And so we did a comparison of those 2 stations and determined that 9 times out of 10, those stations were statistically similar to each other. So we were able to drop either the lake or the lake outlet. On Lake Minnetonka, we wanted stations that best represented the lake. Like I said, we had 21 stations, a little overkill. So we chose stations that had major drainage from the upper watershed and best represented water quality and flow. And then stream stations. We looked at stations that had consistent flow, defined banks, had a rating curve potential. And rating curves is an equation that allows us to develop a relationship between water level and flow. So if we could develop a rating curve, that reduces staff time out in the field, but still allows us to have sound science to make management decisions. And then we also looked at ability to install monitoring equipment to collect that water level or to collect storm water, which is important for loading decisions or loading data. So with that, stations monitoring objective. Are they going to be an anchor station? Are they going to be an E-grade station? Are they legally required? Some stations we have to legally monitor them. and then some will be better suited for diagnostic purposes. Our monitoring plan was reviewed by the planning department, by Wink Associates and our partners, and after a couple back and forth, going back to the drawing board a couple times in certain sub-watersheds, we came to agreement with all of these parties. So we have 11 sub-watersheds. I'm not going to go through all 11 sub-watersheds tonight. I'm just going to give you an example for 3. So we'll be looking at Lake Minnetonka, Long Lake Creek, and the Minnehaha Creek. Oh, let me back up. The maps I'm going to show you do not have lake names or stream names. So if you want me to point out what water body I'm talking about, or you have a question, please just say what lake is that or what stream is that. The legend before you, I handed out, or the Minister Ardell handed out. So squares symbolize the lake stations, and streams symbolize the circles, symbolize the stream stations. Yellow indicates it's a pass station, orange indicates it's an anchor station, red a diagnostic station, purple project effectiveness or research station, pink is legally required, and the dark blue is monitored by another organization. And that looks black, but trust me, it's dark blue. Now all these symbols will appear on the examples that I'm providing, but if you have a question about Shuts Lake, something may shut, okay. So first, Lake Minnetonka.
I just have a
Manager
question.
Blix?
So if it's yellow, does that mean that you're not going to do it anymore?
It means that its priority or purpose is changing. It may become an anchor. It may stay as an anchor station. It may shift to an E-grade station. So it'll be then monitored on a 7-year rotation, on a 7-year rotation. So there'll be some breaks in between. It won't be consistent data. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is the Lake Minnetonka sub-watershed. Again, squares indicate lakes stations and circles indicate stream stations. We have 4 stream stations in the upper northern part of the sub-watershed, and we have 21 lake stations. So 25 stations in all. And we are moving to 8. Oh,
This
yes.
is the first time I've seen a couple or several of these identified as creeks, like Dutch Lake Creek and Langdon Lake Creek and Schultz Lake Creek. Are they like ditches or?
Manager Miller and board managers, some of them are, but they do all drain to Lake Minnetonka. So.
And we identified them before this same way?
They are considered the creek outlet that will come on top of it. So usually they're just small little channels that overflow every now and then.
So as I was saying, there's 25 monitoring stations in the Lake Minnetonka sub-watershed, and we're switching to just 8 anchor stations in this sub-watershed. So these stations will be monitored on an annual basis to assess change over time. That does not mean the ones that we have dropped as anchor stations, they will be picked up in the E-grade rotation.
Can you go back just to
Yep.
get a better comparison from that to?
21 days.
So we have Halsteads, Jennings, Forest, and I can come to a TV screen here. So Halsteads, Jennings, which are impaired water bodies, and they have the major drainage from the upper watershed. Forest and Stubbs, again impaired water bodies, but they're characterized the western bays of Lake Minnetonka. Carmen and Crystal characterize the middle bays of the lake. Slowrise Lake South and actually characterizes most of this part of the lake. Statistically, these bays are quite similar. And then Gray's Bay characterizes the outlet, or near the outlet of the lake.
Could there be development patterns that would, recognizing that there's correlation, right, given land use patterns. Now, if the land use patterns change, could that correlation go away, and how would we know that?
Well, as development changes, or if land use pattern changes, we can pick up diagnostic stations to assess that.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily
Because
mean
these are base stations.
these are
not
base stations.
Other ones.
Mm-hmm. And through these, we'll actually can assess change over time. So we could potentially start to see, oh, there is change happening. Let's get in some more get some diagnostic stations here to assess why. So it gives us that flexibility.
At some point, will there be a map of all the stations that will exist in the sub-watershed?
This is not a map of all of them, these are just
Okay.
the anchor stations. Yeah.
Thank you.
So Lake Minnetonka will not be assessed for E-grade until 2021, so we don't have those stations listed here, that's why. Yes,
Manager Becker.
How was this analysis coordinated with our major efforts like the 6 Mile Creek effort?
we worked with planning as well as Wink Associates to come to agreement for this monitoring plan. So we looked at our data, we asked their opinions on their knowledge on the watershed, and we didn't make any cuts essentially. We were just like, give us your opinion. What do you think would be best as anchor stations? So we looked to them for the recommendations. We didn't do another 6 Mile diagnostic study to create this monitoring plan, if that's what you're asking. Is that what you're asking?
Well, the next question was going to be, is the network sufficient to judge the effectiveness of the work in 6 Mile Creek?
Oh, well, I will be getting to the 6 Mile Creek subwatershed in a couple of slides.
But 6 Mile Creek flows into Halstead's Bay.
Yes, we have a Halstead's lake station right there, so we should be
And
able to
one
assess.
station is good enough.
Well, this station has been monitored for over 10 to 15 years, so yes, we have determined it is sufficient to assess what's coming in from 6 Mile Creek subwatershed.
Mr. Meehan?
Manager Becker, managers, there will also be monitoring stations upstream of this within the 6 Mile Creek subwatershed. This is just the one location
Yes.
within the lake itself.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, not so that is clearly. Any other questions before I? One more point I want to make is that research and monitoring through the strategic direction, we do collect biological data and we also collect invasive species data. So while we're out there, we're going to be grabbing grab samples to assess and assist the zebra mussel study on Lake Minnetonka. So these are the additional stations we'll be collecting data on. So Long Lake Creek's the watershed. We have Long Lake. This is Long Lake. This is the lake outlet. This is the lake inlet. This is the inlet to Tanager, and this is Tanager Lake. This is one case where we assessed the lake and the outlet itself to determine if they were statistically similar, and we found
Where was our improvement, recent improvement?
they were
Right there, yep, right there.
Right there, middle of the lake?
No, just south of the
So
road there.
actually,
Just so.
No,
Just
but
south-
I'm
just
saying
south
the
of
outlet
highway.
was in the middle of the lake?
Just south
Okay,
of
all right.
So as I was saying, we did a statistical analysis to compare Long Lake Station, the square, and the lake outlet, which is that circle just south of that, and they were statistically similar in water quality parameters. So we are, whoops, back up a second. Before I go into what we are cutting here and what we're adding, is I want to point out that there are two streams that flow into, that merge and drain into Long Lake. And we have another stream off to the eastern side that also drains into Long Lake. We have very little data on those streams and the lakes on those chains, of the stream chain. So we are going to be doing some diagnostic work up in that region because we believe they may be some source of nutrients that are impacting Long Lake. So because Long Lake and the outlet are very similar, we are just monitoring Long Lake as our anchor station, and same with Tanager. And we're focusing our efforts on doing diagnostic work in the upper portion of the watershed. So long-term change will be assessed by the lake stations, and we can move these diagnostic stations around to assess what the issues are in this watershed. When E-grade comes around, we'll be able to pick up those older stream stations again, if necessary. So.
In that, in those red circles, is that continuous flow?
Some of it will be. We have done in the past, we have some monitoring data on School Lake and Woolswood Lake, which you don't really need to know where they are, but that's that one chain on the western side of the watershed that has a lot more diagnostic stations, we sort of know from our monitoring data plus from the TMDL that may be the source, and we're trying to pinpoint really where is the source coming from. So Minnehaha Creek, the watershed. Through the statistical analysis, we went from 10 stations to 8. The Grays Bay Dam is our very first station, then 494. Excelsior is before Meadowbrook, which is that heart-shaped lake there in the middle, and then the falls is our very last, or Hiawatha Avenue, right before the falls, is our last station on the creek. Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, they monitor the chain of lakes, as well as Diamond and Nokomis and Powderhorn. They're going to be continuing to monitor those lakes. That has nothing to do with our 2017 monitoring plan. Those will stay. Through our analyses and our criteria that we've worked through, we're only dropping the station on Xerxes Avenue. We feel that these 7 stations really characterize land use and major watershed features throughout the watershed. And this allows us to pick up additional monitoring stations, such as the ones near cold storage, to assess project effectiveness when we tear down cold storage and we put in our stormwater management there. Brian?
There wasn't a project effectiveness station on 6 Mile. Was
6 Mile I still haven't come to 6 Mile, so.
Maybe I'm confusing it with
There's
Long Lake. I'm sorry. The wetland just south of 12. Like,
this.
right in here.
We have not done a project effectiveness there, no. So this is something new we'll be doing.
Okay.
So, as of now, we haven't been planning, and our research and monitoring haven't talked about adding an effectiveness monitoring station there. That's something that could be done. It's not in the works right as of now. So, we'll add it to our list of things to talk about. So.
This is the first time I've seen a map quite like this. The dark blue versus the kind of green that would indicate some kind of a stream. What's the differential between?
Oh, I'm sorry. The dark blue is the stream shape layer, and then the green is wetland layer.
Okay, so it would be flowing.
Right.
All those dark blue
Flow through wetlands.
would flow into the wetlands, and the wetlands all flow into some creek structure,
Mhm.
someplace in the Janzers?
Correct.
Okay. Are those dug, or are they natural, those blue, dark blue?
That
Depends
I.
on how straight they are. I think you can kind of tell.
Manager Miller, they're a mixture of both. Some
Yeah.
of them are in the ditch, some of them are just natural.
Okay.
Thank you.
So there, your answer.
All right. So down to 7 stations on Minnehaha Creek as anchor, and then we added 2 project effectiveness stations. This again allows staff to have the flexibility and time as funds to do additional diagnostic work as well as effectiveness monitoring, and really allow us the time to do analyses of the data to coordinate efforts with planning. So I can show 6 Mile. I have that information, but I can save it at the end if like. You want me to save it? Or show it?
No, actually, I just had a question about on the Minneapolis Park Board monitored sites.
Mhm.
They do the work of actually monitoring. Do they crunch the data? Do they give the data to us?
They
How
do
is-
both. Manager
Okay.
Shuckleton, the board managers, they do both. They gather all the data and then they crunch it themselves, and we also crunch the data until we have duplication. We can see if something's off.
And is the data structured in such a way to integrate into our systems?
Yes. So it's already, we have where it's in the works to incorporate it into our WISKI data management system to allow for easier processing and analysis. So, and they collect the same parameters as we do.
Will they use E-grade?
That is still not determined. They've been involved in all the technical advisory committees, so they are aware of it. They've been helping us build it. It's just a matter of, I think, them seeing how successful it is for us to implement it. So.
Sure. Thank you.
So, summary, changes in our anchor stations. These are the stations that are assessing long-term change throughout the watershed. If a station did not get picked for to be an anchor, it just means they'll be picked up as E grade or changed to a diagnostic station. So we are reducing to 7 upper watershed lake stations, 8 stations on Lake Minnetonka, 7 stations on the upper watershed creeks. Again, these are the creeks draining to Lake Minnetonka, and then 7 stations on Minnehaha Creek. So that's 29 anchor stations. We feel, R&M Research and Monitoring Staff feels this is highly doable to assess long-term change throughout the watershed and provide sound data for making management strategies. But I just want to highlight that it's a 42% reduction in our anchor monitoring. So what are we going to do with all that time and all the funds? We're going to actually use it to assess what are going on in our streams and our lakes, and really provide recommendations and strong and sound science to management strategies. So really starting to coordinate with planning on our efforts. I mean, we ran this by planning department. They were excited to see this change and what we can do with our diagnostic stations. And with that, I'll take any additional questions.
Is the rate and type of land use change in the watershed homogeneous over the sub-watersheds?
Manager Becker, board managers, no, it's not. There's Minnehaha Creek sub-watershed is pretty urban. Please back me up. And then there's more change and development going on in the 6 Mile sub-watershed and potentially in Long Lake, Schutz and 6 Mile Creek have more development pressure going on. And then Long Lake and Painters, Dutch and Langdon are there's not as much development change going on or development pressure.
So should that be reflected in the sampling plan?
In terms of where we are collecting, where our anchor stations are,
In the number?
and the number, it is. We believe it is. If you want me to run through a different sub-watershed, I can, but I just wanted to give you an example. So
That's,
it was one of the
trust you.
criteria that we looked. I'm sorry if I didn't state that in the criteria, but that is one of the things we considered is what is going on in the sub-watershed at the time.
Mr. Mead.
Manager Becker, there is a more detailed 6 Mile watershed plan that the staff has put together that will really try to focus in on the land use change that's happening out there as well. It's probably another yet to be seen activity that'll come on front of it.
one thing I was expecting might be said was that an analysis of the data on the stations that are most affected by the high land use change shows greater change or variability over time. But doesn't sound like the data was looked at in that fashion, or maybe it can't be.
I would say the data was looked at for correlation between the different stations, so where there was a change within the land use, those stations were then left in place, and they're left in place on the sub-watershed plan to be able to evaluate the land use changes. Where there was a correlation that could be directly connected, and we weren't seeing significant differences in those statistics, that's where we looked to pull stations out as part of that analysis.
Right. Thank you.
Manager Blixt.
Kelly, I didn't see any legally required stations.
That is very correct because the examples I provided did not have them. I can quickly show you if you'd like.
I'm just curious as to what is legally required.
Twice as many.
The district worked with Wink and we put a sand iron filter in at the Dutch Lake Inlet. And so once a month, due to the permit requirements, we are required to monitor the Dutch Lake Inlet, which is right there. And then
And who requires that?
the DNR.
There's an appropriations for pulling water.
Ah, yes,
and
I recall.
So Mooney Lake was landlocked, and there was a pump put on the lake to alleviate high water levels, and so they pump into the Gleason Lake subwatershed. And so part of the agreement with Plymouth and I believe Wayzata and potentially maybe the DNR, don't hold me to that, but we are required to monitor lake levels at these 5 locations when they pump. So,
That's,
And-
in an agreement with Plymouth and, okay.
yep. So City of Plymouth and I think the City of Wayzata, because Wayzata is impacted by those by that pumping. And there's one more.
We've only pumped once, is that correct?
We pumped in 2014 and 2015, and then I think, 2016 as well. And then the last one is 6 Mile, the Acrati property. Due to the wetland violation there, we are agreed to help out with the monitoring at that station, which is right before it flows into Halstead's Bay. So it's not much, but it's something we needed to keep and be aware of. So.
Are there agreements, I mean, there are other agreements elsewhere that bind us to,
Potentially, but these are the ones that we are aware of. I'm not sure what other agreements you may be talking about.
I was just reading an agreement with City of St. Louis Park about Twin Lakes and monitoring inflow out of a pond that we created.
I'll add it to the list to look into, that's all I can tell you.
Gotcha.
Sorry.
We do, Manager Shelton, and the board managers, I am aware of the issues going on at Twin Lakes. Tiffany and I do coordinate on that,
No,
but
I
that
know, I
is the
know.
first
I feel
I've
like-
heard of that, so. Yeah.
And this is the 6 Mile that people have asked about. There's the one up on the screen now.
Oh, yes, this is 6 Mile. I can quickly run through this. So 6 Mile, Three Rivers Park District monitors 4 of the lakes in the subwatershed. And then we have that illegally acquired station up at Acrati. And I'm gonna quickly give you the lay of the land since there's no names. This is Pearson's, this is Wasserman, this is West and East Auburn, Lunston, Farley, and then Mud. And then again, it flows into Lake Minnetonka through Hudson's Bay. So these are all the stations we were monitoring. Prior to the diagnostic study that Wink did in this subwatershed. So once they did that study, we picked up additional monitoring to validate some of their analyses or recommendations. And we worked with Wink in planning on that. So it's all the red stations. And now that monitoring is actually done, and all the analyses and recommendations are being put into the Comprehensive Watershed Management Plan for the 2017. And we are just focusing on, to assess long-term change. Throughout this subwatershed, we're focusing on Wasserman. We're going to have a second monitor, someone monitoring water clarity in Pearson's. Pearson's is good water quality. And by monitoring just the clarity, we can sort of assess. If there's something starts going funky in that lake, we can get back in there and monitor it and assess what's going on. So Wasserman is our anchor. This works on that management unit, assesses that management unit. And then the inlet into Auburn, which assesses another management unit. And then the outlet of Lunston, which is sort of the break we know from the CARP study. That's sort of the break in this watershed. And then the Parley Lake, and then the Mud Lake outlet. We know that this is all one elevation, so that is a long-term monitoring station due to its data record. We want to keep it. But this again allows us to have flexibility and funds to go in there and do project effectiveness monitoring as Anna Brown starts implementing the 6 Mile plan, and then we can do additional diagnostic work if necessary in here.
Sorry, I was just thinking of a different monitoring station that we, over at Camp Coldwater.
Yes, I believe the National Park Service took that over from us.
Okay.
So that has been taken over, the responsibility.
Okay.
And the one at Hiawatha Avenue is
Still an
done.
anchor station.
So, and the one that was in the creek at like 30th Avenue.
Let me, hold on one second. I know which one you're talking about, Manager Blix. Sorry.
You didn't expect us to go get very far without a tangent, did you?
That's okay. I hardly get in front of you guys, the board manager, so it's okay. So the one, so the WAMP station, I believe it's at
Right, that
34th
one.
Avenue. We've coordinated with Met Council when they decommissioned that station. We actually picked up additional monitoring parameters at our Hiawatha Avenue station to accommodate what they have lost and what we are gaining. So we share that data with the Met Council.
Okay.
So, and we also have a USGS partnership at that station, at the Hiawatha Avenue station. That's where we get the water level, continuous water level. So, with that, I mean, this is how we plan to operationalize it. Is, you know, in a year from now when we come back and say, well, we are going to add a couple more anchor stations, or here's a diagnostic station. So this is just, again, we have to try. So,
Any other questions? Thank you.
thank you.
All right, there are no permits requiring variance or discussion. Item 11.1. Resolution 17-018, authorization to award contract to conduct stormwater pond sediment surveys.
Good evening, Chair, and managers. Tonight, staff is requesting authorization to enter into a contract with Lake Associates to conduct sediment surveys at 6 of our stormwater ponds that are managed by the district. This contract does exceed the $25,000 threshold by which the district would be required to seek a competitive quote process. However, WAG's specific knowledge of these ponds and their history of performing these sediment surveys makes them uniquely qualified to conduct these surveys efficiently. 6 ponds are scheduled to be surveyed in 2017. This work is sequenced according to the Project Maintenance Land Management Maintenance Manual, which sets a typical survey rotation of every 3 years for the 28 stormwater ponds under our management. These ponds include Swan Lake Pond in Orono, the Long Lake Ponds, the north and south basin of the Long Lake Ponds in Long Lake, Twin Lake Ponds in St. Louis Park, Cedar Meadows Pond, and the Southwest Calhoun Pond, Basin 1 in Minneapolis. Southwest Calhoun was last surveyed in 2011 as it's on a 5-year rotation, and then the other ponds were all surveyed in 2014. Based on those surveys and our understanding of how these ponds are filling up over time with sediment, we anticipate that the Long Lake Pond may need maintenance this year. This is a summary of the cost breakdown of the scope that WAG provided, which is attached as attachment A. The base cost of the surveys, which includes the grid surveys, the actual going out and taking the sediment depths and assessing the current sediment levels. Those calculations in a technical report that will be provided to staff ahead of June 1st, so we can use those calculations for our work plans and assessing maintenance needs. That base cost is $15,690. Any ponds that are over that 50% volume capacity loss, that threshold, those will need to have the sediments tested for contaminants, which will determine the cost to maintain them in the future. That would be a maximum, if all 6 ponds required that sediment testing, that would be a maximum of $15,140 in addition to the base cost. If the Long Lake Pond alone would need to be maintained, that cost would be just $1,830. So staff tonight is requesting authorization to execute the contract with WAG for $30,830 and authorize the district administrator to approve change orders not to exceed $33,913. Any questions?
Any questions?
So, I'm sorry, I didn't read this before. Which ponds are, oh, okay, I see them. All right, thank you.
I'll move approval.
Second?
There's a motion and a second. Any further questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Manager Bliss?
Now I have a question. I mean, but it's separate from this.
Sure.
Just since she's here, looking at the maps, it made me think about some other ponds.
Sure.
When we're looking at
Sure.
all of the monitoring maps, and it just strikes me that I never hear about monitoring and checking out the ponds up above Long Lake. Are they on our list to be
Right there.
Yep.
checked?
Long Lake, but north.
No, these are the ones above County Road 6.
Serial and
Oh,
transit.
yeah. Those are both on our survey rotation as well, Manager Blix. I believe the Deer Hill Pond was last surveyed in 2015. The County Road 6 pond was surveyed last year.
Okay, great. I just didn't remember that so we've never had to dredge them out.
We have
yet.
not, no.
That's
neither
why.
was maintained.
That's-
Work on, sorry?
They are,
North and south
yeah,
of,
they're above,
So this is County Road 6, this is Long Lake, and then the Deer Hill Pond is just upstream of that a little bit to the left.
Is that near that property we bought, and gave it to, the DNR?
No.
That road with
it's
The
fairly
city-
close.
city
It's-
coordinator bought
It's
the house.
within a mile.
Okay.
That's Wolfsville
Yeah.
Woods.
I-
Yeah.
We looked at it
Yeah.
one time.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Yeah, we stopped by there in the
Yeah.
van.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
thank you.
Item 11.2, Resolution 17-019, authorization to partner on a Long Lake Creek subwatershed carp assessment and grant proposal.
Thank you, Manager Shackleton, managers. So I'm here tonight to discuss a request from the cities of Orono, Long Lake, and Medina, as well as the Long Lake Waters Association, for the district to participate in a grant request to the Hennepin County, the Natural Resource Opportunity Grant Funds, for a proposal to study common carp, assess common carp, and develop a management plan in the Long Lake Creek subwatershed. So I'm going to outline the purpose of the request tonight. Kind of review the new priorities for the AS program through the strategic planning process. Discuss a little bit about the Long Lake Regional Partnership that's formed out there. Give you a little bit of an overview of some of the issues and drivers and the management strategies in the Long Lake Creek subwatershed. And then touch on the grant proposal itself and just conclude with the summary. So, like I mentioned, the cities of Long Lake, Medina, and Orono, as well as the Long Lake Waters Association, has requested district partnership in this grant proposal. They've identified the Hennepin County Natural Resource Opportunity Grant Fund as a potential funding source for a project to really assess common carp in the Long Lake Creek subwatershed. In your packet should have been 2 letters of support from Orono and Medina, as well in front of you, 2 additional letters of support that came in after the packet from City of Long Lake and the Long Lake Waters Association. So staff will be recommending authorization to partner on this request and provide in-kind contribution valued at $10,000, and I'll describe what's involved with that $10,000 here in a little bit. So first, kind of revisiting the strategic planning process and the new priorities for AIS. We've identified management and control of AIS when certain criteria are met, such as common carp, to effectuate improvements in water quality and ecological integrity. So those criteria are going to be things like the species needs to be well understood and their impacts need to be well documented, and there needs to be management strategies clearly identified on how to go about managing that species. So these are high impact species. Secondarily, this work would also have to be prioritized within our planning and project priorities. Our other priorities are early detection, rapid response, promoting research, and supporting prevention efforts, which I'll talk about next, the next agenda item. But really, this Long Lake Carp project is a really great example of how we're already kind of implementing these new priority direction. We've been very coordinated with planning through this Long Lake partnership and all the efforts that are being developed out there. So this project could be a really great example of how we can integrate staff between planning and R&M to really reach organizational goals. So the Long Lake partnership that's developing out here, So the cities of Orono, Medina, and Long Lake all passed resolutions early in 2016 to basically say we're going to work together to pursue grant funding for water quality improvements in the subwatershed. They've also recently, over the last month, all three cities have passed resolutions of support to pursue a grant fund to Hennepin County for this CARP project. Also recently, this Long Lake Waters Association has formed. It's composed of residents from each city, from Orono, Medina, and Long Lake, so it's a good cross-section of the whole subwatershed, and they're really focused on the whole subwatershed as well as Long Lake. Their mission is actually, they recently formalized their mission is to provide collaborative leadership in improving and protecting the quality of Long Lake and the Long Lake Creek subwatershed. So additionally, as the district has been working on developing its comprehensive plan, we've been focused on coordination among the cities and lake association groups to establish some common goals. And then, knowing that district resources are limited, and we are definitely focused more heavily in other geographies at this time, our best role to participate in this project is through more of a technical and coordinating role as a regional unit of government, just keeping everybody on the same page, providing that technical guidance, and as we'll also show, we can provide some value through helping complete the assessment work. So here's a map that might answer a lot of the questions that have come up tonight. So on the map, there's the letters correspond to the legend down there. These are district investments over the last several years in projects that we've implemented in the Long Lake Creek subwatershed. Probably don't need to go through all of them, but it just shows that we have had some significant investments in the subwatershed, so it'd be definitely worthwhile to continue to expand on these projects and continue working towards improving water quality throughout this subwatershed. Briefly, some of the major issues in the subwatershed involve excess nutrients, degraded ecological communities, degraded and disconnected wetlands and terrestrial corridors. Kind of what's driving those issues involves altered wetlands, common carp, stormwater runoff, there's internal loading, and then the water quality issues from upstream lakes affect the downstream lakes. Some of the strategies that have been identified to address those drivers involve wetland restoration, carp management, stormwater management, controlling internal loading, and restoring those upstream water bodies. So the proposal itself, it's based very much like the 6 Mile Creek carp assessment we just are wrapping up with the U of M, based on that same science that they developed. And with carp management, there's 3 pieces of data that you really need to know before you can sustainably manage carp. You can't just go in there and remove them anymore. You need to understand first, what's the population in each of these lakes, because there is a threshold density of, so many carp provide ecological damage in a lake. You need to reduce populations below that threshold. So we need to know that. We need to understand their movement patterns across the subwatershed. Sometimes there can actually be separate populations throughout a subwatershed that need to be managed differently. Movement patterns also will guide management and help us identify areas that they use to spawn and areas that they may congregate for removal efforts. Then you need to identify where they're spawning. This is done through some other TrapNet surveys. This is really most critical because you need to cut off spawning and address those sources to actually manage the population. So this is accomplished through a variety of monitoring activities over the course of 3 years. 3 years is kind of a desired time period to do this in for a couple of reasons. One is to have a better confidence in the information that you're gathering to guide management. And secondly, to look at movement and spawning over different seasonal conditions. Carp act differently in dry seasons, wet seasons.
On 6 Mile, the carp are moving from lake to lake, and on Long Lake, is there a situation like that similar? They're moving to other lakes?
That's unknown, so that's really why we need to develop this information through a project such as this.
Well, is there open water between lakes?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
And
I understand that.
yep, yeah. Yep, we can go back to this map real quick too. So in Long Lake, there's kind of an eastern and a western stream reaches. One flows out from Holy Name Lake, and the other one's from School. But they can join just north of Long Lake by County Road 6, kind of flow into Long Lake. Then it flows down all the way to Tangier Lake, and then obviously to Greater Minnetonka. They can, more than likely, there's no physical barriers that we know of that prevents them from going to Tangier all the way up to the upper reach of the subwatershed. And we learned from 6 Mile, having that connection to Minnetonka provides a whole suite of problems. It's difficult to block their movement from Minnetonka, obviously.
Should we just build a dam?
Build a dam. Got the answer. Yeah, so we can move on here. So some of the funding details of the project itself. So the total project cost has been identified as $205,000. With district in-kind participation, as we're proposing, it can reduce that project cost to $159,000. The grant request is for $100,000, and that's the max amount that the grant allows. Just internally, staff is kind of reading this as probably a lower likelihood of actually getting the full amount from this grant. Typically, from our understanding, these grants are kind of geared more towards implementation. This is kind of more of an assessment. So we don't know if they'll get full funding or maybe get partial funding, and I don't know how that's going to affect this next item. This is the city's cost share. So the cities have talked about kind of splitting the remaining portion, or $59,000, between the 3 cities over the 3 years. That's assuming they get the full grant request of $100,000. If that doesn't happen, I'm not sure how that affects the city's willingness to contribute more. If this grant request is not successful, there certainly are other opportunities this partnership has identified that they'd go after next. So a little more about our proposed contribution. We're certainly able to provide kind of that technical guidance to our partners and coordinate. But additionally, initially we were asked for cash contribution to the project. Looking at the scope, we identified a better value that we could participate in. Knowing that 6 Mile Carp Management is beginning, our new priority is management of AIS, such as common carp. In 2018, we were going to be asking for these trap nets in the work plan, which will be part of management at 6 Mile. So by purchasing $10,000 of trap nets, which will help, they basically help survey young of year carp, which is used for identifying spawning locations. Just one of the criteria we need, one of the pieces of information we need. By doing this and having some staff time to perform the surveys, like I mentioned, we could reduce the grant ask by $46,000 and provide a better value to our partners.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
What does $10,000 get you in terms of trap nets? Like, I've seen pictures of carp in a net. How much is that net?
Which are you talking like the big removal nets?
Yeah.
These are different. These are smaller nets.
Okay.
That it's enough to get 6 sets of nets, which is the typical number you put out in the lake. They're kind of set up. There's like a funnel, and it's for capturing smaller fish, such as bluegills, but catch young carp, bullheads, things like that.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
We've actually talked to Bradley Purgatory, who has done the same work with the trap nets as well. So to kind of conclude, this regional partnership is really a great example for other cities to follow. They're really looking at issues on a systems level, and it's a good example of how the district can plug into these opportunities without having to lead and put out a great amount of resources. We know common carp are a driver of poor water quality and ecological conditions in the watershed need to be a part of the management strategies. We're well suited right now to provide this technical and coordinating role. And then this $10,000 purchase of equipment, which will have other uses as well, can effectively reduce the project cost by $46,000 And then finally, as I mentioned, this project really fits into our new priority direction, really integrating with planning and managing high-impact species. So with that, answer any other questions.
What did we spend on the 6 mile Carver City?
That was a 3-year study with the U of M, bigger subwatershed, but that was just over $500,000.
So we learned a lot of,
We did, we learned a great amount.
and you're using what you learned there to
We-
reduce the cost
we-
of this project.
We were able to improve their scope based off of all the knowledge we gained from the 6 mile work.
Move approval.
Second. There's a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Continuing on, we're talking about AIS prevention with watercraft inspection and cost share proposals. So resolutions 17-020 through 24 for Carver County Lake Minnetonka Conservation District, the Three Rivers Park District, the City of Shorewood, and the Minneapolis Park and Rec Board. Just procedurally, Council, how should we do this at the very end? Like, can we do all the resolutions at once, or should we just do them?
Mr. Chair, board members, any manager could move to approve all the resolutions at once. If any individual manager would like to take them one by one, then that's the way you should do it.
Thank you for the guidance.
All right, thank you. So, yeah, I'm going to review the AS cost share proposals that we received from our partners for 2017. So again, I'll just review the priorities for the AS program through strategic planning process, go over the proposals themselves, and provide our recommendation. So I just walked through our new priorities, and whereas AS prevention used to be a higher priority for the district AS program, is now a lower priority. We know prevention is not 100%. We know programs are imperfect, but there's still value in supporting our partners' efforts to prevent the spread of AIS, but to do so at a better cost-effective position for the district. So to achieve that, we'll be doing a lot of work over the next couple months, meeting with our partners to discuss their programs and funding strategies. Our partners are well aware that the district's 50% cost share was not going to last forever. They've seen great value in that funding while it's been present. So everyone's kind of at a point where they're willing to sit down, and they know we need to work on a more sustainable approach. And one of those, interesting enough, one of those ideas that I've noticed from all our partners talking about is we have a lot of partners in Hennepin County. The counties receive state appropriated funds for AS prevention. Hennepin County receives over $300,000. So I think there'll be some meetings coming up with Hennepin County trying to talk about how those funds are used. They've been hesitant to supplant programs, existing programs at this point. But I see a lot of our partners having that need for those types of funding. So I think that would be a big discussion coming up. So this graph just kind of shows the funding history since 2012 for these grants. 17, I'll note, there's a couple new lakes in the cost share partners proposals. And those lakes were previously the roaming inspector lakes that we've paid 100% on. So our partners saw the value in having inspectors at those lakes, and they are now willing to put in more money to cost share those. Excuse me. So here's kind of just a summary table of the proposals we've received. We have $175,000 budgeted in the 2017 work plan for cost share funding. There's $174,900 in proposals. We received two proposals from Carver County, one for Lake Minnewaska, as well as one for Pearsons and Wasserman. Pearsons and Wasserman was one of those previous roaming inspector lakes. There's a couple ways inspections could occur at the Pearsons and Wasserman Lake. The county's looking at having one inspector either kind of go back and forth between the two lakes as use dictates, or they're looking at trying kind of regional inspection concept, where they have one inspector stationed at a lake, and they have kind of an on-call sign at the other lake where a user could call the inspector who's 5 minutes away. They could come and inspect their watercraft. It's unknown if people actually utilize that. It's voluntary, but it might be worth a shot. Lake Minnetonka Conservation District is proposing inspections at Carson's, Halsted, and Wayzata Bay. This is to complement DNR inspections that occur in the lake. So DNR, let's see, last year had almost 6,000 hours of inspections on Lake Minnetonka. Three Rivers also provides inspections at Lake Minnetonka Regional Park. That's another proposal here for Three Rivers, is to increase inspections there to focus more on outbound inspections, so preventing AS from leaving Lake Minnetonka through that access point. They've also have a proposal for inspections at Zumber, Stagger, and Auburn. Again, these were previous roaming inspector lakes that we paid 100% on. They're looking to cost share these. It's a low amount, limited presence, but it's focused on providing just a presence at these lakes. They're low use lakes. So users know that anytime they come, they could get inspected. Hopefully that user then takes more precautions. Again, with the city of Shorewood and Christmas Lake is still operating a decontamination program at their launch. And they're partnering with the DNR still on this pilot decontamination program that actually has mandatory decontamination for higher risk watercraft, such as those with like ballast water. And then the Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board, funding for Calhoun, Harriet, and Nokomis. So the Park Board has passed resolutions in the past to require all incoming and exiting watercraft to be inspected, so they gear towards 100% inspections at those launches. So here's just kind of putting those different proposals on kind of a spectrum of more of a limited presence at the lakes, more a comprehensive approach on the other side for AS prevention. You can see the Zumber, Stagger, and Auburn, more of a limited presence at these low-use lakes, but it's trying to get users to just realize they could be inspected. Minnetonka, Pearsons, and Wasserman, somewhere in the middle. Minnewash to Christmas and the chain of lakes, more towards comprehensive approach. So knowing that our 2017 budget for AS prevention cost share was $175,000, we received just under that in request. Knowing that we'll begin working on a strategy to reduce our level of financial participation in these cost share partnerships.
What's the odds of coming in that close?
Good budgeting.
$88. Is that the pieces?
So we'll be working over the next couple months on trying to achieve our priority of lesser financial participation, but we're requesting approval for this cost share request at a not to exceed level of the requested amount for each partner. So, any questions?
Eric, what's the status of being able to evaluate for Starry Stonewort?
Yeah, that's going to be more of an early detection effort that we'll be doing. Additionally, we'll be we check access points weekly. Minnetonka will be checking access points every 2 or 3 times a month, looking for Starry Stonewort. But inspectors also look for all aquatic plants in any AIS.
So it would be part of this inspection program. They'd be able to.
Well, inspectors always
able to identify that as well.
Well, they're looking to remove everything.
Okay.
Starry Stonewort, whatever it may be, any kind of vegetation or waters, eating mussels. The inspectors always, that's part of the protocol. But additionally, we're out looking for early detection for new infestations.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Does anybody want to pull one of the resolutions or move all of them as a group?
Move all of them.
I'll move resolution 17-20, 21, 22, 23, and 24.
I thought I already did.
I hear two motions that are identical, so I'd call one of them a second.
But use the power of the chair.
I second. My motion.
That's gracious. All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Item 12.1, our preliminary budget discussion.
Thank you, Manager Shackleton and managers. This is almost the end of the first quarter of 2017, so it's time to start thinking of next year's budget already. And this is without having any real hard and fast numbers. I just wanted to go over the general process, talk a little bit about where we've been in the past, and kind of where we see this going forward. We do have some new guidance this year because we have a strategic plan in process and kind of a direction defined, and also the HR, the Human Resources Plan in process. So those are some new data points that we can use to better inform our planning for the budget. Of course, we're looking to put together the annual budget and the work plans. This is due to the counties by September 15th. And you can kind of see the major goals. There's to develop the total budget for projects and programs, the work plans that go along with those dollars, and then to set the levy that finances that, and also looking at other sources of revenue in addition to levy. So that's kind of all part of the overall scope of the plan. And in terms of looking at previous years, we've seen these lines a few times now, looking at the budget on the top and the levy on the bottom, where we've had that budget to levy gap that we've talked about in the past couple of years of budget cycles. We've made some progress in trying to bring those lines together. Actually, this most recent year in 2017 that we've started now, there was actually a reduction in the expenditure budget, but there was an increase in the debt service payment. So it would have been about a 3% increase if it wasn't for the increase in a debt service payment of a little bit over $1 million. So again, we're trying to bring those lines together. We do also have kind of the closing out of the 325 Blake Road project in the next coming year, and that debt payment comes due then next year as well. So those are some things to kind of keep in our sights going forward. For the 2017 budget, again, just kind of the numbers that go along with those charts. You can kind of see the second column of numbers was the approved budget that the board approved last fall and that we're now operating under. And you can see the changes along the second to the far right column and how those worked out. So we've kind of had a couple of years of pretty significant belt tightening and reductions in some of our program areas. We've had some very modest growth in some of the capital projects, and then the land conservation debt service project was all planned and anticipated, so that was kind of accounted for through long-term finance planning. And again, just to kind of those same numbers in kind of the 3D pie chart to see how that separates out to show where the bulk of our resources are being expended. And a lot of this kind of goes along with what we've been talking about in the strategic plan process, where we want the district's focus and emphasis on making significant impacts on the landscape and having a lot of the other programs and activities we do to support those activities. Remember this kind of chart from last year, and you don't expect to look at all the small numbers, but we called this, before we had the strategic plan, we had the strategic framework, and the goal was to try to look at how things interact with different parts of the budget, so that if there's a change or adjustment in one area, there's oftentimes an impact in another area. And this was kind of pre-strategic plan process, so we're going to be developing some products and processes, and we kind of explored one of those kind of tracking mechanisms and planning mechanisms in the PPC, the committee just prior to this meeting, of a ways to kind of layer those types of programs and project activities on top of each other, so that we can make sure planning forward out a few years in advance, we can look at the resource needs from a kind of a staffing perspective, from an investment perspective, and other things too. But again, this was another frame that I think that the board and I know staff found useful in terms of kind of assigning how the budget dollars are spent across the year. So this is kind of the bulk of our work in the next few months. We need to initiate the implementation of the strategic plan and the human resources plan in the budget process. Some of those things will happen sooner. Some of those things will be a transition over a few years. So we need to kind of work with you to develop those priorities and those plans for how those implementation strategies will happen. We want to make sure we have that alignment and fit between programs and our overall approach to the implementation of the comprehensive plan.
You use the word division, and that it seems to be so contrary to the whole
Yeah, I agree.
effort that we're doing on
Each department, yeah. Each work group or work, I think you're right. That is a divisive word, obviously, and which is the opposite of what we're trying to do, is have more collaboration. So, I think for planning purposes, we still will have, and I think in the document that we shared in the PPC meeting, that's where we're going to see some of that overlap, where we have kind of staff resources and district investments, and look at how those kind of overlap in some areas, to kind of have that to take down those silos and barriers. So that's a good point, Manager Miller. We should make sure that the language reflects what our plan indicates. And then just kind of looking through, and again it says the division there, but the major kind of work areas where some changes are going to be. That there's pretty significant change this year, especially in some of the areas that we've talked about. So those will, I think in prior years, or last 2 years anyway, we've focused on things that had a dollar change of $10,000 or more, is where we put most of the emphasis of our presentations and our discussions, and there probably are going to be more significant things this year, just because we're shifting priorities in a pretty significant way in some areas. In terms of the plan for the timeline going forward, next month we'll start to review kind of the scope and scale of the history and gaps. Later this month we'll have the audit, so we're going to be able to really define what types of carry forward is available from prior year. Look at the 2017 budget and see if there's any opportunities to, we already know we've made some changes with some of the cost share programs and the cost share grants and some of those types of things. So how those resources are allocated will be an important thing for looking at what we're doing both this year and how some of that might carry forward next year as well. So then we'll be bringing this forward to the board in committee meetings in April, May, and June. In the month of July, we hope to consolidate some of the budget direction that we receive from the Board of Managers and develop the work plans that go along with those budget directions. And then in August, kind of have the final review with the CAC, with the Board of Managers, and have everything ready for the presentations in September. And then in the formal public comment period then is in December, before the budget is finalized. So in terms of the next steps, we need to define what are the project priorities for the district in the coming year and also coming years, to look further ahead, like we've done in the past couple of years. Sometimes there might be some opportunities to shift or be opportunistic as those priorities and opportunities come along. One of the big things going forward is to really define staff roles and responsibilities for budget development. This has been a pretty significant part of what we've discussed in strategic planning, and also will be a kind of part of the human resources planning process in the weeks ahead. Look at the analysis and projection of anticipated carry forward that we'll get from the audit that's pretty much wrapped up, but you will see towards the end at the meeting at the end of this month. And then kind of develop some models and scenarios for you to consider for the budget and levy, and then work through the work plan process. And I think to Manager Miller's point also, in terms of not using the word division, I think the whole way that we've done work plans could evolve a little bit also to be more formatted, similar to kind of a tracking document that correlates directly to the strategic plan priorities, so that it's not necessarily as much by staff work group and more by strategic priority for the whole organization. But that's still, a lot of that is still to be developed, and some of that might be a transition over a couple of years rather than swift change this year. And that's about the level of information I have for the kind of just getting folks thinking about the budget for 2018 right now. We're kind of still waiting to get kind of the final numbers from the audit, and then we'll be able to kind of see where our balances are from last year coming into this year, and what our starting point is, and we should have that information for you folks soon.
From my point of view, I've never felt more comfortable with the budget process than I did last year. The way it was presented, and we were permitted decision points on, and it was so much clarity that it was very easy to make decisions, and knowing what impact decisions were going to have was a relief.
Any comments?
Well, it was a good process, and to the extent we can replicate it, that would be useful.
That's our hope. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Anything else? Then we are adjourned.
Except for the administrator's report.
Ha!
That last thing. If I may, it's very brief.
I just
very
saw
brief.
Erdal at the very end, so apologize.
Just a few quick updates, and then we can go ahead with your adjournment. One update is I attended the Orono City Council meeting the beginning of last week, kind of for two purposes. One is to kind of see what they were doing on the issues with Big Island and the docks at Big Island, and also they actually had before them the CARP study that Eric Fieldseth mentioned. That was part of what they were going to vote on and pass as part of their consent agenda that evening. But you received a little bit of information from our legal counsel on the Big Island study, so that's we can kind of figure out how to deal with some of those things and what type of official communication might be necessary in the future. We also had last week the 6 Mile Halstead Bay Planning Partnership out at the City Hall in Victoria on last Thursday. Anna had put together the draft resolution for the partnership agreement, and so that all of the partners are considering that and figuring out, we're trying to kind of bring all that together soon. And then there's also kind of they also, like you have seen, some of the draft structure of the plan for 6 Mile Creek. The 6 Mile Halstead Bay plan is getting together too. Also kind of out in that end of the watershed, our staff and the engineer met with Lake Zumbra residents and representatives from Victoria, Carver County, Three Rivers Park District. I think that was all that was at the meeting, related to water level issues at Lake Zumbra, and looking for solutions to those. We are still kind of in touch with those partners and are looking to help coordinate and facilitate some kind of agreement or direction among the property owners. We're serving more as a kind of a expert advisor in the process, and letting the property owners that are affected kind of determine what the path forward is going to be. So stay tuned to that process. And Manager Olson's been very involved and kind of in the loop with some of those things too, so he's been helpful there. There's a couple MAUD things that I wanted to run by the Board of Managers. One is the legislative reception. Breakfast and Day at the Capitol is the end of this month on the 29th and 30th. There's also summer tour, tentative, the schedule for the tours are being put together for the summer of June 21 to 23. And lastly, at the meeting last time, we talked a little bit about drafting a letter to request a special meeting. There was some discussion on the board, and I don't think everyone thought it was a prudent thing to do to draft the letter, so I just wanted to kind of bring that back before you now. They were hoping for letters sometime in the month of March. Because to have a special meeting at their summer tour to discuss bylaws changes, they needed to have at least, I think, 15 watershed districts request that. I did check with the staff at MAUD earlier today. I haven't heard back to see if they already have the 15, then it probably isn't necessary. But I have drafted a letter and could follow through with that. I did also in the letter specify that if you wanted to request the meeting, that does not convey support for any specific amendments or changes to the bylaws, because I don't think that was a position that we wanted to be in until we actually have something to review and consider. But I don't know if the board wants to have any questions on that or any.
Manager Brooks?
Well, I guess I would move that we just would direct you to go ahead and send it if it's required and needed. I mean, you know, if that's what their request is, to move forward to replace the current administrator and make some changes there.
Well, I don't know why we request, we haven't discussed whether we're willing to pay for it.
Well, that's not in the letter.
No, I know, but, you know, the assumption is that we are supporting
No.
the amendments, of the change in the bylaws, the new structure,
It's to talk about it.
just to talk about.
Yeah, it's just to talk about it. That's all that they're asking for, right?
Just to convene the
To
meeting.
convene a meeting to discuss it.
But, you know, what, I think the question is whether that, by asking it to be convened, if that it demonstrates some level of support. You know, I don't know exactly how that would convey, so it's.
I thought you had that in the letter that said it does not.
Right, I do.
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's why I was moving it.
All right,
Say-
that makes sense.
Yeah.
I see that.
I would send it.
The motion does lack a second.
Okay.
All right, there's been a motion and a second. Could we just distribute it, just read it real quick?
Sure. And I can give you copies too.
I'm going to withdraw my second. I move to reconsider.
You just withdrew your second, there was no vote.
Well, I don't know, you gotta reconsider first. Or,
Well, there's been,
Can I-
there's been no votes, there's
oh,
no, there's
then I withdraw
no.
my second.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, got that.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Lars, I also have seen that Moz supplied a form letter to send in, which to my reading was very it didn't go at all beyond requesting a meeting. The reason for the letter is that under the MAUD bylaws, to hold a special meeting, 1/3 of the watershed districts need to request it, which is 15. And because the board, if it acts on bylaws changes in December, it wants the ability to discuss them at the summer meeting first. So that's why they've just asked for the opportunity to convene a special meeting in June.
Hey, maybe there's a different version of the template. I used a kind of version that the ADA distributed amongst several members, and then added in the kind of second to last paragraph that this motion does not convey support for specific amendments, and the MCWD Board of Managers reserve any judgment on the merits of potential bylaws amendments until the details are provided for full and thorough consideration.
So the idea is that we would discuss them in June and act on them in December. Is that,
Well, I
is
think
that the way that it
it
has
ca-
to work?
it depends a little bit on who from the board will attend the June meeting. I know that in other times, we've had kind of some discussion here prior to those meetings and about how that would be represented by the vote at the meeting then.
But the final decision wouldn't be made until December, right? Is that,
I believe they plan to vote on the bylaws in June, so that they can have the structure in place in December, is my understanding. I don't know if you have a different understanding, Chuck.
Well, I sort of did, but I'm not, I don't have the certainty now to say that I shouldn't defer to you. I had thought the process required discussion at a meeting and then action at a subsequent meeting, and therefore they wanted to have the discussion at the June meeting so that there could be action at the December meeting.
that's kind of a typical process for bylaw changes. So,
There's been a lack of clarity in this process and kind of a drive to get more clarity. My understanding is they hope to have a staff hired and in place by the December meeting, which you'd have to have the bylaws changed to to employ an individual and for to hire and employ somebody prior to that. So.
Well, how can they hire, excuse me,
No, you go ahead.
how can they hire anybody if we haven't amended
Well,
the budget and agreed to additional?
that's why my assumption is that amendment was gonna happen in June. And then they were gonna hire somebody by the end of the year is my assumption. But again, there's a lack of clarity, so
Manager Becker.
Lars, what's the impact of not sending this letter?
probably little or nothing, because my assumption is that they'll get 15 watershed districts to submit it. So I think that's maybe a good option.
I don't support sending a letter I don't understand the impacts of.
Well, it just seems odd that they hadn't sent us information. I mean, I don't understand why we haven't been informed.
President White and I have both requested information, and it kind of doesn't exist yet, so.
I think it's just weird.
Who's the ADA?
The ADA is the Association of District Administrators in MAUD, so it's kind of a subset of MAUD.
Do we get assessed fees for that too?
No.
No executive director?
No.
Are there
In fact, I've attended a couple meetings and I haven't even submitted receipts.
Okay.
What kind of concerns are you picking up from them?
That there's not enough information being shared. That they have some preliminary budget information in mind that's been discussed but not shared. And it's hard to make decisions if you know the numbers but you're not broadcasting them.
Are they concerned about lack of leadership?
I think a lack of kind of follow through on some of there's some big things that seem to need to happen, but there's not a lot of kind of follow through on it, is the impression I get from that group.
And I get the sense that there's the dynamo behind this effort is coming from the ADA to get clarity.
Well, it's interesting that I think that it seems like the membership, which is primarily managers, should figure out how to have this letter writing campaign rather than relying on their district administrators to initiate and follow through on that. But I think that's one of those situations with the follow through that they're trying to figure out how to get that to happen. So.
Well, when I have had conversations with Ray and asked him about why we're not getting communication from MAUD, he tells me, and you and I have had this conversation previously, he tells me he's sending things to you and that you're supposed to be forwarding it to us. But then when you and I have had that conversation, you say, well, you haven't gotten anything from him to forward to us. So
I haven't heard any communication from Ray since the December meeting. So.
Yeah, so that's what's a little unclear to me, is why there's no communication.
It's pretty clear that Ray's ready for retirement.
Yeah.
If he hasn't done it already.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Things are, not good.
It's been a long time since I've had an email from Ray.
Yeah, exactly.
With the board's permission, maybe I'll try to see what more I can learn, and if there's any need for a letter.
Not to do anything.
Okay, that's even better yet.
I
I can do that.
I had heard that at the meeting in March, the legislative breakfast, they were going to be sharing more information. That's what I had heard. So we shall see.
And my last update is that we hosted a State of the River presentation last night at the Folkestone in Wayzata, and it was we had about 48 people there. Probably about a quarter of those might have been staff and CAC members. But it was we also had a county commissioner from Hennepin County, a county commissioner from Carver County, and some mayors in attendance. And it was Trevor Russell from the Friends of the Mississippi River gave the presentation that he had worked with our research and monitoring staff to make sure we incorporated our data and our information into the presentation, it was very well received. So we look forward to having more of these educational events for policymakers. Our next one will be on May 4th at St. Mary's Greek Orthodox Church, where we've also had a project there. And Steve Woods from the Freshwater Society is going to talk about the story about how watersheds were formed and how they interact. So it's another opportunity to reach another group of policymakers and staff from our partner organizations and communities, and we look forward to doing some more of those this year as part of our 50th anniversary celebration. And from what I understand, today is actually the 50th anniversary, so happy 50th. And that's all I have.
All right, thank you. And for the second time tonight, we're adjourned.